Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight. We're going to talk about crime fiction because it's what we do. My name is Lindy Cameron. I'm your chair for the evening, or a chair. I'm a national co-convener of Sisters in Crime Australia. I'm a published crime writer and most recently a brand new independent publisher. Thank you. On my right is the inimitable, how do you like that word, Kerry?
I like
inimitable
it, yeah,
Kerry
nice.
Greenwood. I don't really need to say anything else, do I? Kerry is the author of, what, 21 now?
20 Fridays.
20 Fridays. Yeah. About to be the sixth Corinna. So that's 26 crime novels. Kerry also writes historical fiction, a trilogy called The Delphic Women, Medea, Cassandra and Electra. But we're here to talk about crime this evening, even though Medea is probably one of the greatest crime stories of all times, really. Next to Kerry we have Angela Savage. Angela is the author of the Jane Keeney series, which is a fabulous series that's set in Thailand and looks at lots of cross-cultural issues, crime in Thailand, what it's like to be an expat Australian living in a foreign culture, which in itself is can be a crime, I suppose, in some instances, and it's certainly an interesting and intriguing way to deal with modern life and modern issues. And right at the other end, we have Honey Brown. Now, Honey is the author of The Red Queen and The Good Daughter, and Honey herself describes her novels as thrillers, and she says that she's very glad to be enveloped or encompassed into the world of crime because it's not where you originally thought you were coming from, really. But, you know, a thriller is crime, as far as we're concerned. So we are all crime writers. We are here to entertain you, and we're going to talk about why there is such a fascination for crime and why we women are so good at it. So I might start by throwing it open to Honey at the far end there, and we'll just talk for a second about why you didn't see your psychological thrillers as crime to begin with.
I think the main reason I didn't see them as crime is because the crimes in my novels often aren't solved. It's often about the psychological aspect behind the crime, and it's about the victim's reactions to the crime. So I had this idea in my head that there had to be sort of like this detective element where we went through that process of, you know, someone had to pay for the crime. But in my novels, it's sort of that sense of life where things don't always necessarily turn out perfectly, and sometimes the bad guys get away with it.
Is it good that they get away with it sometimes, or is it just...
It depends on the character. You can write good bad characters, and I've actually considered that. I'd love to write a character just so wicked and so bad, but at the same time the reader's like, oh yeah, I like this guy.
Dexter.
Yeah.
We'd all love to create a Dexter, wouldn't we? Angela, if you'd just like to introduce your characters.
Sure. Well, Jane Keeney, who's the heroine of my first two novels, is a 30-something Australian expatriate based in Bangkok who's kind of fallen into detective work. She started off as an English teacher, but she's also a fluent Thai speaker, which gives her a bit of an edge. And funnily enough, being white, 30-something female in a city like Bangkok makes you largely invisible, and it's that Jane uses to her advantage. Also because people don't anticipate that she can speak Thai, so she's privy to a lot of things that might otherwise escape people. Of course, that has its disadvantages as well, because she can hear what people are really saying about her. But I'm really I mean, for me, crime is a great vehicle for expressing the kinds of issues that I'm interested in. I worked cross-culturally, worked in Southeast Asia for about 6.5 years, and I hadn't intended to write crime novels. I was really interested in writing about that experience. But the more I got into the crime genre, the more I realised that the issues that interested me lent themselves perfectly, because working cross-culturally is a lot like being a detective. You know, you're always trying to figure out the big picture from a small set of clues, and you're working out who's a reliable source from who's trying to take you for a ride, and you're looking for meaning lost in translation.
It's the same at primary school with the mums.
Having a character like that in a foreign culture and being invisible, especially because if she speaks Thai and no one realises it, it's kind of like a modern version of Miss Marple sitting in the corner doing her knitting, when no one thinking that the little old lady, you know, would be even interested, let alone cluey enough to put the puzzle together.
There is an element of that, and you know, and obviously I've had that experience of being around people and you know, being the butt of someone's joke. In Lao, for example, it's a tonal language, and people call you madam, but if they say madam, it means black dog in Lao. So someone says, you know, yes, madam, can I help you? And I say, oh, you know, I'm not madam, in Macau, which means I'm not a black dog, I'm a white dog. And then, of course, you know, it kind of unsettles them that you can have that insight, and puts them back in their place a little bit.
I used to do that on the hospital bus because I don't look like I speak Greek. Well, I really don't look like I can speak Greek, and I do. And I'd listen to all these old kirias, old yayas, you know, grandmothers, talking to each other about the disgusting morals of all the girls on the bus, one of whom was me. And I'd thank them very politely in extremely formal Greek as I got off. And I used to get this wonderful reaction. It used to cheer me up all day. But it's true, if you can really seriously disconcert someone if you turn out to have understood what they said. Absolutely. Because, I mean, in Irish, in Gaelic, sora means louse. So if you've got some Irishman saying, yes, sir, or I will do as you wish, it means not exactly what you thought it meant.
Kerry, do you think that whole Miss Marple thing is still plays a part in women's crime, or do you think? Of course,
yes. Yeah, because as Robert Burns would say, there's a child among you taking notes, and that would be there is a certain invisibility if you're female. No one expects you to be smart. When I first started out as a duty solicitor, which was a long time ago, when I started university, there were only 6 women in an intake of 200 at Melbourne University, and they asked me what a nerve I had, said the intake professor, starting to do law when I would be only getting married and having children. I was taking up a place that a man might use. I thought I'd left that behind at school, but boy was I wrong. And when I started doing crime, I was legal. I worked for Legal Aid. I was the first female legal aid solicitor working in the magistrates' courts, and they all underestimated me once. But it was very pretty to watch. I'd see this guy thinking, aha, you know, female, therefore doesn't know any law, wrong, and doesn't know how to handle a magistrate's court, equally wrong, and he would, you know, assume that I didn't know what I was doing. So that's a lovely assumption. Unfortunately, it never lasts, but it is very nice when you can get it. And to an extent, if you've got, say, Miss Marple sitting there doing her knitting, or you've got any lady who looks like she's thinking about a shopping list or thinking about going to pick up the children from school or whatever, she will largely be overlooked, so she hears a lot of stuff that she probably shouldn't hear. And if, like in the case of Corinna, my baker, she's got a shop. People walk into it talking. They keep talking to each other. She picks up whatever's going on. And so she'll hear a lot of things that she might not necessarily... Well, it isn't necessarily a good thing for her to hear.
Especially these days, because so many people just walk into a shop talking to someone on their phone, and
exactly.
They completely forget that, you know, they're not having a private conversation, and that everyone can hear at least their half, which could be very suggestive.
Don't want to hear. You know? And equally, it's very difficult. It used to be easy to pick out lunatics in the street because they'd be talking to themselves. You know, somebody's having a conversation with Mars. You know, you don't even need to see if they've got the silver paper hat, but now it could be anybody. You know, it really renders the whole thing very difficult, don't you think?
I'm interested in what you were saying before about the double standard, if you like, that you experienced when you first studied law and working in the court system. Because I'm not sure that that's completely gone. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you look at the way Julia Gillard's been treated since she became Prime Minister, that misogyny is alive and well in Australian culture.
It is, yes.
And I wonder to what extent, it'll be interesting to hear the audience's opinion of this later on, to what extent the appeal of women's crime fiction is partly driven by that sense that it's really a bit naughty that women are even doing this. It's like, you know, the Italian proverb about, you know, women are rarely wicked, but when they are, they're worse than a man. And I wonder if that's kind of part of the appeal, is like, whoa, you know, it's still relative to men writing crime, writing violence and writing revenge, it's still unladylike.
The she-bear once accosted rends the peasant tooth and nail, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male.
Precisely.
It's Rudyard Kipling, one of my favourite people. But he was right too, yeah. She-bears do behave like that because they've got babies to protect.
Well,
whether human females behave like that is another thing.
I think they do.
Well,
I think we're always more shocked still, even today, when a serial killer, for instance, like a real life one, turns out to be a woman, and they're out there.
Yes, but the female, they've always been. They used to be poisoners.
Yeah,
because
and now
was,
they use
more
knives.
fun to just, you know, put a little bit of rough on rats, which is thallium, and they couldn't be detected at the time. Into Mrs. Caroline Grill, she wiped out an awful lot of relatives like that. When she went to jail, they called her Aunt Thally. And female serial killers aren't new, but all of the
I think
female
they're more violent
murderers,
these days, though.
Yeah, all the female murderers I've met, which are a reasonable number, nothing compared to the number of male murderers. Female murderers are 10%, and they seem to have been 10% across the board for about the last 300 years, which is how long they've got figures for. They're executioners. They kill, when they decide to kill someone, they'll kill them without a second thought, without ever a qualm. They have to die, so they die. Domestic murders are the most common murders we have in Australia, and all the female murderers I've met have killed their oppressor or the person not because they feel that they are worth defending, because after a few years of being beaten up they just don't care about themselves, they have no opinion of the value of their own life. But it's when the guy always says something like, you know, inevitable, like, "You'll be dead in the morning," was one of my favourite, you know, last words, or "I'm sick of you, I'm picking up your little sister or your daughter." And then they just decide that he has to die and they just kill him. And when I remember talking to one woman who was in that rotten watch house, lying on a bed, totally and absolutely relaxed, and she's about to be transferred to the Supreme Court, to prison and then to the Supreme Court, because she'd murdered her husband by stabbing him 28 times. The 28th one actually killed him. And it's quite hard to stab someone to death. I mean, don't try it, really. You keep hitting bone and bruising your hand. Anyway, after a while, the knife gets slippery. Anyway, I said, but you know, I was a very new duty solicitor. I was about 2 years out, and I didn't know how to talk to her. And I said, you know, "Can I get you anything? Is there anything you want? Can I call anyone? How do you feel?" And she said, "Fine. He's dead. Doesn't matter what happens to me. He can't hurt anyone else anymore. He's dead." Much more like an execution, like the killing of a feral animal, about which you wouldn't feel guilty. It was very interesting. I wrote a book about it called The Thing She Loves.
I think in fiction, it's audience, that readers and certainly reviewers are still surprised whenever a woman creates a fictional murderess who is not coming from a place like that. Just a killer who is a killer who likes killing. A few years ago, I sort of had a proposal for a novel, and I gave it to my publisher at HarperCollins, and it took her ages to turn it down, and she basically in the end said, I can't get my head around a sympathetic killer. Now, I don't know under which rock she had been living forever, but the sympathetic killer in my case was also a woman, and I think that's what she was having the most problem with, not just that I had an assassin that I wanted people to like, but that assassin was a woman.
I'm having that problem right now.
Yeah.
The novel I've written, and I'm in the line as we speak, it's at home waiting for me. That's what we're thrashing out. The female character in it, in the beginning, is something of a victim, although interestingly I've made her husband more a victim, and these two characters get away and go back to their normal life, and she goes on with her husband to do something quite shocking, and I just keep getting back this feedback that how can we make her softer, because they just can't cope with the idea that this woman might just happened to stand by her husband and do this brutal thing without falling over and crying on the floor or something. So it's frustrating.
HarperCollins?
Sorry?
HarperCollins?
Just not saying
remember previous comments on publishers. They very seldom know arse from elbow.
Yes.
And you don't need to tell them, except, of course, for my learned colleague.
I would have thought that Elizabeth Salander had kind of completely wiped the slate clean on that front, and we could all accept that there was a role for strong women. But it's very much 19th century. It's 19th century criminology alive and well. You know that the woman, when she is evil, is doubly so because she's not only betrayed her society and the laws of the society, but she's also betrayed her sex, or her proper sex.
Yes, nothing worse than a killer who happens to be a mother. And if she doesn't happen to be a mother, then that's probably why she's a killer, because she never got to be a mother.
Well, she could even
there's
be
always
a lesbian
something
vampire.
wrong.
Yeah.
Although everyone knows lesbian vampires are all murderers.
Well, of course. Yeah. Silly Kerry. Yeah.
It's the vampire part.
It's the vampire part.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Frankly, if I never see another vampire in a novel, I will not be sorry. The same goes for fairies.
Don't hold your breath on that.
We definitely need a new supernatural person. Even my two favourite writers have both ended up with vampires and fairies and werewolves in the same novels. You can't tell them apart anymore. It's this editing by committee thing that's happening with writing at the moment, except, of course, in the case of my learned colleague, which is rendering everything that's written into, if they've got their way, into a totally homogenised mishmash, exactly like the other book. So, stand up against it, friend. Do not allow them to get away with this.
Yes.
I have to admit, though, I do agree with some of it.
We must have the courage of our vices.
Absolutely.
Yes, must stand up for what we want, we authors.
We're a broad church. I mean, and I think this is what the Sisters in Crime are particularly good at, is welcoming all comers. I mean, you've only got to look at the
width, breadth,
yes, of who's writing what. There's really something for everyone. If cozies are your thing, there's that. If historical fiction's your thing, there's that. The stalk and slash is really what you like. There's that.
If you need
and
a
there's
vampire,
stuff that doesn't have you. If you need some lesbian vampires, we can come up with some of those for you too.
I mean, where are the lesbian vampires? I've missed them.
Oh, sorry. I decline to write you a lesbian vampire.
Damn.
Sorry. You'll have to write it yourself and it'd be brilliant. Go to it.
Well, my first series, the Kid O'Malley mysteries that I first wrote back in the late 90s, mid-90s. They are, I mean, when we decided to Sisters in Crime decided to host the She Kilda convention, which we're putting on in a couple of weeks, and invite all the, existing female crime writers in this country to come and play with us, someone said, well, should we have a lesbian crime panel this year? And I said, time. And I went, okay, that'd be me. Just me, no one else. Seriously, I am it. There is Carol. No, that's the character.
There's Linda Scottoloni in
she's American.
In America.
Yeah. Oh, there's heaps of American ones. There are hundreds of them in America. I've just had a short story published in a collection with all the Americans. Like I'm the token, they would have had more if there'd been more, but there's just me.
Yeah. We could have lesbian in wheelchairs. We could do that tokenism together.
Okay.
We could do a co-write one. Yeah.
Just out of interest, when you organised the first She Kilda 10 years ago, how many Australian women were writing crime then compared to now in terms of the number of guest authors?
We had a big poster. We actually had a poster bigger than this, the big. This is our one for this time. And we had a really big one, and we had 20 names on it. That's it, and that was going down burrows and looking in closets for women who had been writing, even if they weren't still writing. We had about maybe a quarter of the women on that panel had written one crime novel sometime in their life or sometime in the history of Australia, and they happen to still be alive. So at the time there was probably about, I think, 12 or 15 currently writing women crime writers with a pulse in the country, and of them only about 10 are still writing. So now, but 10 years later, there is 50 at least in the country working, writing, giving you lots of things to read. We've got about 65 people on panels for She Kilda, and a good 50-something of them are working crime writers, which is just amazing, just fabulous.
So there's been, just on your statistics alone, I'm really lousy at maths.
No.
Is that a 4-fold or a 5-fold increase?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Where's David?
It's a lot. It's about, But I mean, it's amazing to see, and not for a moment, would I say that Sisters in Crime is responsible for that. But Sisters in Crime just celebrates it at every opportunity. And Angela will tell you that she went sort of dived into crime fiction because of Sisters in Crime, the competition that we run, the Scarlet Stiletto Award. She won a prize in that, and then thought, aha, there's something to this crime thing.
Well, I was going to say it was seminal, but that seems a bit inappropriate for sisters.
It's
more like
groundbreaking.
I call them the midwives of my literary career. They're very enabling. But I'm fascinated, and I'm really interested in what my fellow panellists think about, or my sister panellists think about how we explain that 4 or 5-fold, bad maths, increase in the last 10 years in the number of active women crime writers in Australia.
I can't explain it. I don't know.
The newest one in the fold, can't explain it.
It's partly got to do with Sisters in Crime. It's partly got to do with the fact that detective stories themselves became more popular as postmodernism rose like some ghastly and dangerous poisonous plant to wipe out most narratives. So that if you want something with a story in it, you've got to read detective stories, and if you want something with closure in it, you've got to read detective stories.
And interesting characters.
Yeah, and if you want
something happening.
Something happening.
Not something happening, I think.
Literary fiction is, with of course the exception of my learned colleagues, sisters, a pain in the arse. And what's more, it's very hard to read. If you want to read a chapter of a book before you go to bed, which is quite often, or on a tram, which is quite often the only time people have to read, because we're working so hard, then you want to read something where you can say, hang on, I have read this chapter before, rather than blindly reading it 8 times without the fantasy.
It's a plot.
Yeah,
a crime has got a plot.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to have a crime, a detective, a solution. I aim for a golden age puzzle which must have a solution at the end, where the reader says, rats, I knew all the facts that I needed to solve this, and I didn't solve it. It's just like misdirection. The quickness of the hand deceives the eye, nothing up the sleeve except a few aces.
Or, as Mr. Spock would say,
yes,
linguistic legerdemain.
Linguistic legerdemain is my middle name, Kerry Linguistic Legerdemain Greenwood. So I think that the fantasy has boomed, and romance has boomed, and detective stories have boomed in their broadest, as my colleague says, the broadest form from the subgenres, for those who only read cozies, those who only read crimes in cities, or crimes in countries, or people who own huskies, or whatever. You can find a detective story that will fit whatever you want to know. I mean, that's why I wrote about a baker, because I really love baking, and I really did do
Enable
it.
Your research.
My research was that when I was a student, I worked for a whole summer holidays at a baker's. It was hours of fun, but the hours were a killer. 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it's not what I call morning. Anyway, I think it's got to do with the plunging readability of most other sorts of fiction. My mother, for instance, has stopped trying to read literary fiction at all and goes back to reading biographies because at least they're true, or histories, or whatever.
Yes, life's too short for literature.
Yeah, and it's too short to be bored. I mean, the only people who can't do a game that I play with everybody from small children grown to, old ladies in libraries, which is just I start a story, a fairy story, which turns easily into any sort of a quest. The last one I did was with 8-year-old children who decided they wanted to be on 5 different planets. So it was obviously they've been playing science fiction games. Everybody can do it. I set up the protagonist, I set up the story, and then there are numbers, and they just pick up the story as they reach their number, and I finish it. So everybody can do it, except for 4th year honours English literature students who couldn't tell a story, who killed off the protagonist. And when I said, you can't do that, they said that I was suppressing them. Quoted.
It's because then they can't spend the next 40 pages emoting about it.
It's interesting.
They quoted Umberto Eco at me. And I was the person who went through The Name of the Rose and picked out where it's stolen from all of my favourite authors, including Thomas Browne, damn it. So consequently, I figured that there was something, while postmodernism is still around, us genre fiction people are going to clear it clean up.
Yes.
And it's page turning. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that to me, that I couldn't put your book down, and that surprised them.
Yeah.
Like, wow, here's a book that
Yeah.
I actually couldn't put down. And that's because that's gone out of storytelling.
It's not storytelling. They don't tell stories.
Yeah.
Narrative has been... The author, according to various French lunatics, is dead. I feel the person threatened by that theory. If the author's dead, who wrote their book?
I did actually come to crime for want of a plot. Like my first attempt at writing didn't have enough plot in it. And crime was, because you have to have a plot, it's a good way of propelling
Teaching
the story and all of
plot,
those other, of all the other detail with it. But I've just lost the plot of what I was going to say. But, no, I think what's interesting is the current fashion or the current trend towards literary crime fiction, and that for me is quite an interesting. I think Peter Temple's kind of spearheaded this, and other writers like Chris Womersley are very much there. And Honey's novel was longlisted for the Miles Franklin, which I think deserves a round of applause. And I think it's very exciting as a genre writer to see genre being treated with respect, like that no longer is there a sense that genre means lesser quality. But what's challenging for me as a great crime fiction fan and as a reader is that a lot of this beautiful writing associated with literary crime fiction is the kind of writing that you pause and reflect on and think about that use of metaphor or that choice of word. And in a way, it runs against the page-turning frenzy that we normally associate with reading crime. And I find that I think it's great because I think, I've got a very much a, come one, come all kind of approach to the genre, and I guess we'll probably, as we enter a world of globalisation, we'll probably end up in a stage where there are no genres anymore, all so cross-genre, it's all kind of gone out the window one day. And then you won't be the sisters in crime, you'll be the sisters in crime, stroke romance, stroke sci-fi, stroke fantasy, stroke...
Well, we do have a panel for She Kilda called Crime-ance.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. It took me ages to work out what that was.
You've been thinking in Thai for too long.
Yes.
Yes, but so I think that's also it's interesting that I don't know whether literature is coming to crime in search of a plot, or whether crime is coming to literature in search of a mantle. It's very interesting.
I think it's coming to us. I can't remember who it was now. Someone in the audience might remember if they saw the book show episode with Lindy. Is it Lindy Burns? Yes. Yeah, or Jennifer.
Yeah.
Jennifer, one of them, whichever one that does the book show on the ABC. Jennifer, thank you. And one of her guests just recently, when they were talking about crime, genre fiction, was that they just said, we are the mainstream now.
Yeah.
Literature, capital L, literature, is the subgenre. We are it. We are what people buy. We are what people want to read. We are what gets made into movies. Big, popcorn movies. That is us now, and it doesn't matter whether it's crime or fantasy or even sci-fi lately, but certainly crime. And every now and then the publishers will say, "Oh, no one's buying crime fiction." And I don't know why they do it, because all they do is go, okay, they say to their authors, no one's buying crime. No one's buying crime. Can you write us a thriller? What do you mean by a thriller? Well, crime novel. But we'll call it a thriller because no one's buying crime.
With car chases.
Yes, with car chases.
Bank robberies.
Yeah.
No, thriller's mid-list now. Apparently crime's back in.
Oh, and yes. See, it comes in cycles. It will never die.
Yeah. Well, I've gone in and out of fashion 4 times since 1988, so it no longer worries me. But yeah, I think that it's also that I think that the women write crime differently from men, and attempting to pin down exactly what I mean is going to be really difficult. But they really do, and it's partly to do with if you've got a female hero, it's not just a man without a penis, it's a woman. And women look at the world differently from men. Well, someone was complaining bitterly that the trouble with somebody's, not mine or any of our novels, was that their female characters were just boys without the requisite genitalia. And that was indeed the case, and that's quite often the case. If you remember Jenny Parsons telling me she'd written a male character and forgotten that he had to shave and pee standing up, which tends to mean that you're not looking terribly closely at it. But I really do think there is a female consciousness and a female way of writing crime. I think we are better at it.
Which makes it very hard to do what I tried to do with my last novel, Redback, and that is create a female character who fits into a completely male world.
But you did very well. It's a very good book.
Well, thank you. But it was, I mean, my main character, Bryn Gideon, is an ex-soldier, and she runs a group of retrieval agents, and it's their job to, go rescue people who are taken hostage or kidnapped and that sort of thing. So she's very, very good at what she does. She's very... Macho is not the right word, because she's just good at what she does. She was a soldier. She's trained really well. She's no nonsense, all that sort of stuff. And there is nothing in my mind about her that is remotely male at all. And yet I was putting her into not just a story, but into a genre that is normally written by blokes, and with blokes as the main protagonist, and she was surrounded by blokes too. I've surrounded her. She's the only female on the team, and she's the leader of the team because she's smarter than all of them, and they're not dumb by any stretch. I didn't make a smart female and dumb guys. It's just that she happens to be the smartest, which is why she's the leader. Because in fiction, at least, intelligence floats rather than in real life when incompetence floats.
But it's interesting that you talk about the thriller subgenre, because there's one theory that men don't buy and are not as comfortable reading books with a woman's name on the cover as women are, and but at the same time women, and particularly when it comes to thriller genres, and a lot of women we know, a lot of our sisters are publishing under their initials. So they're the LA Larkins and the PM Newtons. Of course, in my case, I don't have a middle name, so A Savage just wasn't going to cut it. But
I would have done that.
But I find it very interesting that in order to try and get that broad appeal, some women writers are going with their initials, and yet we know that it's women, particularly women in their 40s, who are the great buyers of books. So it's but women are much more, it seems, based on the statistics, that women are much more inclined to read books by both women and men than vice versa.
My first novel...
How's that played out for you?
I had that exact experience, because Red Queen came out initially under H.M. Brown and was re-released under Honey Brown, and they've since decided to keep releasing me under Honey Brown, but they tried me under H.M. Brown.
But you've got such a fabulous... Honey Brown, doesn't it make you want to read that book?
It really
it's just
does.
such a
I
delicious...
always love that the novels I write are dark, so it's such a dark cover and a dark name. My next book's called After the Darkness, and then you get Honey Brown. So I think that creates, hopefully, for the buyer, a bit of a, well, what's going on there?
bit of kind of allure of the ambiguous.
Yes, Angela, I think you made a serious mistake. A Savage.
A Savage.
I mean, for a crime writer, is just perfect.
I think it's wonderful. And my advantage is that Kerry is a unisexual name. There's plenty of Kerry. There is, for instance, Kerry O'Keefe, who, if he keeps laughing like that, I will have to go and assassinate him. But
using the methods you described earlier.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think that men have become a lot more. I get a lot of fan mail from men, no one is more surprised than me. So I suspect that women are the ones who, as you say, buy books, but they buy books for men, and they may easily buy books written by us for men, and the men read them because they're the ones who send me fan mails.
I think back to that question before, we were talking about how women do write crime so well. I think one of the reasons we do is because women actually have a better understanding of menace, perhaps, than a lot of men do, because it's really inherent in a woman to feel fear at times that I don't think men even comprehend. This fear
Exactly.
there, just being alone and walking down the street or being in the house by yourself. Those things women know about, and we understand that sort of really, that tension that just rumbles away. And I don't know that men often feel that, like we feel it.
I reckon we also do revenge.
We do revenge beautifully.
Yes.
Especially
Delicious revenge.
Especially from an imaginative point of view. I mean, I think so. Well, I know personally, and for a lot of my sisters in crime, that you know the revenge fantasies that you can play out in writing fiction are just fantastic. And you know, like I took all the first names and the surnames of all the guys who'd done me wrong and mixed them about a bit and turned them into the evil pedophiles in my novels, and it's just so satisfying.
Yes,
it's fantastic.
It's wonderful.
They know who they are.
It is such fun. Well, Sue Grafton said the reason why she wrote A for Alibi is that she wanted to kill her ex-husband and she thought this was neater than going to prison.
Yes.
And I certainly have killed off several magistrates, quite a lot of clients, a few irritating relatives. And, you know, if provided you change gender is always a good one. If you're really sure the person might recognise themselves because you're so cross with them. But it's also a really good way of beguiling an incredibly boring meeting. If you're stuck there for 3 hours with some idiot wittering on, you don't imagine him sort of stripped or humiliated. You think of him as being stabbed through the heart with an ice dagger.
Yes,
or, you know...
This could just be us, by the way. These people might be thinking right now, hang on a minute.
I'm not getting into a meeting with that woman. No way.
It's fine. Yeah. The ice dagger was a very good one because you can, you carry your eye. You make people get killed every year in various cold parts of the world by falling icicles, you know, from windows and so on. So you just make yourself an ice dagger, freeze it, put it in a thermos, take it along, stab the person in the heart. You count down 6 ribs from the back, chomp, and in case you need to know these things, and then you disappear. The dagger will melt. There's no way of getting any fingerprints or anything. The dagger will just melt its ice. And the only way that the detective in the Golden Age story who was responsible for this found out what it was is that there was too much water or too much blood around. It was too dilute. And there was a tea leaf in the wound due to the person carrying it in a thermos which had tea in it. So you can easily fix that. Just make sure it's a clean new thermos.
Of course, this is not going to work for my novel set in Thailand.
No.
Yeah, in fact,
Plastic
at
thermos.
the moment I'm experimenting, and if there are any herpetologists in the audience, I would love to hear from you, because I'm experimenting with how you get a cobra up a drain pipe. And what you do at the other end when you see it.
But it comes out at the other end. Who's going to be there? I mean, is it a drain pipe in a house?
Giving away that plot.
Oh, sorry, Pippi. Look, I cross my heart and promise I'll never use a cobra.
Don't you just need a
Don't
pipe?
you need a crate? I mean, you know, it's only tiny. It's easy to overlook. And extremely, 100-step snake. As soon as you've been bitten, you can walk 100 steps and then you die. I always thought a crate would be a perfect thing. A coral snake. I remember having someone deliver a coral snake to Franny once.
I'm trying not to kill this particular character.
Oh,
that's hence the cobra,
right,
and hence the options for managing the cobra.
Right, yeah. I thought you were thinking. I had someone
was colourblind and they used the wrong. Wasn't really a coral snake.
No, that's actually happened in America. There was a person who got a delivery from a reptile collector who got a delivery, and he was colourblind and he got the wrong snake. He thought he was getting a hog-nosed Texas hog-nosed snake, which is striped, but it's striped green, and this one is a red striped snake, coral snake. They're incredibly pretty. They look exactly like jewellery.
Beautiful.
And unfortunately, he sort of said, "Ooh, hello, little snakey," and it went fang, which is what snakes have a tendency to do. Thus, I thought it'd make an absolutely beautiful plot point. But those who spend a lot of their time thinking of ways of killing their humans are just other humans are just the same as the guy in Castle. I really love that show. He starts off by saying there are 2 sorts of people who spend most of their time thinking about murdering people: serial killers and writers. I belong to the class that's better paid.
Interestingly, the first She Kilda 10 years ago, we started a thing which other festivals have done, and that's offering, by way of raffle, the chance to get your name in the next book by any of the authors who were there. And the first time we did it, we had an international guest author, which was Lauren Henderson, and there was me and somebody else, and everyone in the audience was throwing money, literally. It was $5 a pop. People were giving us $20 just to have 4 chances to get their name in the book. And so the 3 names were chosen, and that was it. And the audience was so disappointed, more disappointed than any other raffle I've ever seen. and I felt sorry for them, and I said, okay, one more, and this one will get to be a dead body in my next book. I said they won't be alive beforehand, they won't get to speak, they will just turn up their name and they will be a corpse. And the woman who
Jane Doe on the total say your name.
Yes, and the woman who won it that first time came up to me afterwards, and she said, I don't care what I look like, I don't care how I die, but could I be found in an elegant dress? So she was found propped up against a dump bin at the back of a restaurant, slit from here to there, dead as a doornail in a gold sequined evening gown.
Beautiful. Oh, lovely. Are you going to do that? Are you going to do that again this year?
We do it every year with the Davits, and we'll. Yeah,
I've actually got a cute story about that, because I think I must have picked it up from the sisters. I had when I was writing my latest book, The Half Child, it finishes with a karaoke scene, and I had a song in mind for this scene that was perfect. And I fell short. Did you know that you can buy shares in songs? I did not know that until I started trying to get the copyright to print the lyrics from this song. And I fell 18.75% short of the 100% rights that I needed. And I just couldn't imagine this scene without the song. It was so much in my mind. So I put out a competition on my website amongst my friends to say, okay, over to you, here's the parameters. It needs to be a song released before 1997. It needs to be something that a man would sing to a woman. It needs to be over the top and romantic. And, you know, the prize is you get an autographed copy of the book when it gets into print, and you can pick the name for a character in the new book. And my friend who won was a gay Indian Malaysian friend who was based in Bangkok at the time, and we'd been mates for years. We met when we were both working in HIV, and he did have a bit of an edge. He didn't know it at the time, but the character, I mean, I thought he knew the inside of Asian karaoke bars very, very well, and the character was actually Indian in the novel that was singing the song. Anyway, I picked a terrific song, and I was really thrilled with it, and I started working on book 3, and I kept hassling my friend Palani to say, please, can you send me a name for the new book, because I'm trying to, I'm getting it down. Meanwhile, book 2, The Half Child, has gone to the printers. I got the 100% copyright on the choice of song that I needed. And at the very last minute, literally before it went into print, I was looking at the names in the book and I thought, no, those 2 Thai names are too close together for a non-Thai speaker. And so I just changed one woman's name at the very last minute. And when Palani finally got back to me, he said, I've always thought I'd like to have a daughter, but the older I get, the less likely that seems. So I always thought if I had a daughter, I'd like to call her Mayuri, and maybe if you give a character in your novel that name, it'll be like that person will exist. That was the name I chose to change it to at the very last minute. Yeah. It's a Thai woman's name. How did me, a straight white woman in Australia, and Palani, a gay Indian Malaysian boy in Bangkok, come up with the same name at the same time? It's just beautiful.
You're on the right track once you get coincidences.
That's right.
They are really, coincidences form the universe.
It's just lovely.
Yeah. Every year when Sisters in Crime run the Scarlet Stiletto Awards, there is always a running theme or 3. There was, about 3 years ago, for the first time ever, we had stories featuring mothers who were investigating crimes with a baby or children in tow, and that had never happened before. Other years we've had instances where people want to get rid of their aged parents. So most of the murders are people knocking off their parents, and then another year it will be women knocking off their husbands. So much so that at one stage we actually sort of had to put our little hands up and say sometimes it is easier to get divorced than to plunge a pair of scissors into your husband's throat just for a story.
I was going to say that before when you said that only 10% of women are ever serial killers. I was about to say...
murderers. Only 10% of women are murderers.
Murderers,
yeah.
sorry.
10% of murderers are women, not 10% of women are murderers.
What I was going to say was perhaps that's just because we can't, in our minds, there's people out there that would go through with it, but we don't have so much of that physical ability to actually do it, so that holds us back.
Yeah,
poisoners don't worry about physical ability. It's 10% across the board, really, since the 18th century. Women are not prone to murder, and it's got you are in an excellent position to poison someone if you're forced to cook their dinner. It's remarkable.
every night
How nice and tasty the arsenic is. It's nothing to do with physical force. It really is, and we've got an inhibition against murder, which I suspect has got something to do with the fact that babies are extremely irritating. And if we didn't have an inhibition against murder, no one would get to more than about 3 weeks old.
Yeah. There's a couple of people loitering at either end of you all here with microphones. So we'll just throw open questions to the audience if anyone would like to ask any of us or all of us a question.
Probably too scared now.
I promise to kill you if you like it. Only if you like and volunteer.
I will kill you.
Hello, I love crime fiction and I love your writing in particular, Kerry. It's always a delight to see you in the flesh. I also judge myself for liking it and worry that it might be feeding some dark urge in society. Do you ever wonder about that?
No, I don't think you're feeding a dark urge. I think you're slaking a dark urge. It's the pornography argument. If there's too much pornography around, will you have more sex crime or even more sex? And I don't think so. But if you're feeling, that person got it. It's the Texas defence, the valid legal defence in Texas is he needed killing.
He needed killing?
Yeah, he needed killing. Really is pleaded in court. It's amazing. What a system. I think that crime fiction does provide a certain release. I remember when I was I was very ill, and I was feeling particularly cross with the universe because I thought it was going to kill me. Possibly not before time, but I didn't want to die. I liked reading Colin Wilson's Encyclopedia of Murder. It made me feel better, and the people who are dead in the Encyclopedia of Murder have been dead a long time, so I don't find it necessary to start wiping out anybody personally. I think it's a very good way of redirecting whatever it is that is making you cross.
I also think it's more of a worry of what's going on in our heads up here, what we give to you, rather than you enjoying it once we've done it, because it's,
We write it so you enjoy it.
I think there's also
in a form that you can enjoy.
Something to what you said before about, and Honey, you said it as well, although you also noted that your first novel doesn't really have the resolution, but I think there are ways in which the appeal is about the solving of a case and justice being done and justice being served and revenge being served in a way that doesn't always happen in real life.
Yeah.
So you kind of read the fiction to make it easier to manage that kind of lack of resolution and justice in the real world.
Yeah, and also if I've just written a novel in which I kill off the sort of supervisor at the factory, and you work at the factory and you read my book and yes, this is how it can be done, and you enjoy it vicariously. It might not be the same bloke or the same woman who's giving you grief, but you probably figure that the author has met that same person or someone like it somewhere. And really, most of the people we might say, oh no, it's not based on anyone we know. No. Yes.
I had that though. With my first novel, there's a scene where a Melbourne-based academic goes to interview a Thai sex worker about her life, and she's using Jane as the translator, and it's a bit naughty, but the academics asking all these really presumptuous questions about this Thai woman's life, and the Thai woman says to Jane, "I'll just make up a story. Give her a sad story, because that's what she's here for." And then they have a completely separate conversation all the while with Jane saying to this academic, "Yes, this woman was sold by her father into sex slavery and all this kind of thing." And the number of people who came up to me afterwards and went, "Was that based on so-and-so at such and such?" And I'm like, no, it's made up. In fact, if anything, it's based on all of us who have that experience of being the non-native speaker in a foreign country. But it was very, very funny, the number of people who thought this was definitely that academic at Melbourne Uni, or that academic at Monash Uni, or that one at La Trobe.
Well, Val McDermott always wonders why people assume that she, in her lesbian sleuth series with Lindsay Gordon, why people always assume that the sex scenes were modelled on something that she had done, but never assumed that the murders were.
It's so true. People ask that all the time, and if that was the case, well, Quentin Tarantino, wouldn't we all be really looking hard and fast at him? But it is. Whenever you put a sex scene in, everyone questions that.
Yeah, people assume I've had sex on an 13th floor balcony, and I haven't. No, I haven't.
It was a 12th floor.
It was a 12th floor, yes. Any other questions?
One here. Oh, hi. Is anyone except me getting the urge to set a crime novel here?
You mean at this event?
A whole hall full of really well-dressed, calm-looking Melbourne, nearly entirely women, and some crime writers.
With dreams of murder in their hearts.
There's a few brothers-in-law.
There has been a bit of murderous rage going around at the She Kilda administration trying to organise the Davits table placements. I thought that would be a great night for someone to end up dead as a result of the toing and froing over who's going to sit with whom.
Every year when the conveners gather for a weekend on Phillip Island to judge the Scarlet Stiletto Awards, we are convinced one of these years it's going to be an Agatha Christie 10 Little Indians, Someone goes missing. Oh my God, Carmel. Where's Carmel? Has anyone seen Carmel? And then we find Carmel, who's over there somewhere.
No, don't make it Carmel.
Yeah, don't murder Carmel. It's always Carmel. Carmel's got to go first for some reason. Then we find Carmel under the rosemary bush or something like that, and then we think, Anne was cooking. She went out to get rosemary, and we haven't seen, so we're convinced it's going to happen one year.
I shall watch your future progress with great interest, and make sure you keep my phone number. I do very good bail applications.
As more people are reading on Kindles and iPhones and iPads, has electronic publishing helped the emerging writer gain a wider audience, or do you find yourself being squeezed out by the more dominant and famous authors?
I actually think that ebooks are the best thing to happen to emerging authors, the best thing to happen to mid-range authors, because even if you do it yourself, if your publisher won't do your backlist for you, it is actually quite an easy thing to do to republish your own backlist. Now, the independent publishing company that I started last year, I'm doing both. I am publishing everything I published as a paperback, I'm also publishing at the same time as an ebook. The bonus of that for my authors is that I do a Kindle version, which means that technically the paperback is only available here in Australia, but the Kindle is available to the world, to the world. So my authors, for the first time ever, are being published in Australia and technically in America. So for new authors, especially if they're starting off with a new publishing company or a small publishing company, I think it's absolutely the best thing that can happen. It might not make any of us millionaires, but I think it will make a good difference to the money that authors can earn.
And I think that it just seems to be producing a bigger audience, because the stuff I get from people who read things on Kindle, read my books on Kindle, are not the same demographic of the people who read books. And what appears to be the case is what people are saying, I don't know if this is true, but what they're saying is that if you're going on a long journey, a plane trip or something like that, or you get a book that you only want to read once, then you put it on Kindle. If it's a book, if then you really like it, you buy the book. That means I get it twice.
Yes,
Absolutely.
And a perfect example of this is that as prolific as Kerry is here, her novel Medea, which is published by my company Clandestine Press, is at the moment only available here and on Kindle. So when Tess Gerritsen, big name American crime writer, was here recently, Sisters in Crime had her as a guest, and she mentioned in passing that she liked historical fiction. I thought, aha. I gave her a copy of Medea. She read it on the plane on the way home, and when she got home she wrote a review, which she put up on Amazon, where now the world will see Tess Gerritsen has done a review of Kerry Greenwood's Medea, and it's available on Kindle in America, in Canada, and all that sort. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
And I think that's the other thing about ebooks that is exciting, is because it's so virtually costs nothing to send review copies out to bloggers, to reviewers alike. So you're getting much more commentary on literature, or on the writing that you might not otherwise get. And I mean, look, I just think if people are reading, it's good. Anything that's helping people to read is good. And the other thing as an author that I'm excited about is, apparently it means there's an appetite for shorter novels, and that's a bit easier on us, really, isn't it?
Hi, my name's Joan Duncan. I've been reading Kerry Greenwood's books for quite a long time, and they're on audio.com, and a lot of you other ladies, I can't find you on there, but to get unabridged books on audio is great for me, because I've got a bit of a problem. I haven't learned, the dog hasn't learnt to read yet.
Oh dear.
But to have unabridged books is just wonderful, and if I read them, for some reason I then go and buy the print version, of which I'll never read, but I like to have it as well.
Wow.
So thank you very much for having unabridged.
Thank you.
Good on you. My first one is available at Louis Braille Audio, unabridged.
My first novel's available too.
Mine's not. I'll work on that one.
On audio.
Audio, yeah. But people are reading audiobooks on car journeys, which I think is such a good idea. I mean, I was selling more Franny books to truckies than I was to any other demographic for a while there, which is deeply surprising, I tell you.
Before I was published, I used to read on tape for my husband all my novels, and he would take them on the road with him and listen to them that way.
That's good. It's like the good old Victorian thing of sitting down and sewing with someone reading you, and this way you don't have to listen to Sir Walter Scott. It's really good.
You mentioned Kindle as as an ebook format. Are you publishing on any of the other ebook formats?
Well, all the books that I'm publishing are on Mobi and EPUB, which are available, which you can use on all kinds of contraptions. Yeah. The only thing that I don't have myself is a contraption myself. So I actually, I actually read mine on my laptop. Well, I don't read them because, I published them, so I don't need to read them again on a laptop. I've already read them 50 times to publish them. But yeah, I always get a version of it myself, so that I can read it on my laptop. But I've yet to get the actual thing itself, because when all my authors start making me money, lots and lots of money, and I can go to the Frankfurt Book Fair, then I will need a Kindle for the long plane trips.
Well, I think Alan and Unwin are on all those different things as well as Kindle.
Yeah, and text use Kobo books as well as, and as well as, in fact, the Kindle version is usually the later one to come out. Yeah. So they do tend to make them available in multiple ebook formats. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, there's one over there.
Hi. So I'm actually working on my own novel right now, but the one thing I keep getting criticised about from the person who's reading it is my choice of character names. Have you ever thought that maybe your character names are just too odd, and you've been told your character names are too odd, but you're so in love with the name that you just don't want to change it no matter what anybody tells you?
Then don't change it. I say the hell with them. I mean, I didn't realise I was setting up for myself an entire lifetime of explaining how to pronounce Franny.
That's right.
Because I only thought there were going to be 2 books, but I had no intention of. Nobody has ever said change the name of a character. I mean, I might change it if someone writes me an outraged letter saying, "Excuse me, madam." And I do, when I see previous comments about coincidences, I did end up describing a young man who murdered an old woman for her money, and then he turned out to have the same name as a later Adelaide murderer, which is a very scary thing.
That is a bit scary.
And I was going to change the name, but then I thought, this is fiction. It's not meant to be real.
I have had the experience of being asked to change a character's name by my editor.
Yeah.
But that was, again, it was because the names were in Thai and they were too close to each
similar.
other.
Yeah.
Too similar. As one of my friends said, it's like the Brothers Karamazov. And I thought, no, it's not like the Brothers Karamazov, but I really liked that you're mentioning my book in that breath. But, and the good thing was that it did, and the one thing I would say, I mean, you can take Kerry's advice, and you probably should because she's published a hell of a lot more books than me, but the only other thing I'd say is play with it, because you might find that like in my case, I had to change, on the advice of an editor, I changed the name, and I came up with a name that was much better for an evil lieutenant colonel in the Thai police who was called Ratratan, which, when you read it in English, has the word rat in it. So it was perfect. So I would say, just if that's a barrier, try writing a character with another name.
Like Sue.
Global replace.
And if it doesn't work,
and see what your friend thinks
leaving.
then.
Yeah. But if it's your main character and that's the name that's connected to your main character, then it stays.
On the other hand,
with it.
On the other hand, if you're writing fantasy and it's a name, is it fantasy? Oh, okay. So it's not fantasy. But if you were writing fantasy and it's one of those unpronounceable names that people just, eventually just give up trying to pronounce in their head and just start calling the character Trevor.
Oh, Cthulhu,
yeah. Or whatever it is. Then, or if, as Angela says, you've got a lot of characters who have similar names. That's the one thing that I recommend is don't have names that are too similar.
Yeah, but
don't have names that are too ordinary if you want them to be remembered. But then don't go the other way and give them ordinary names if you're trying to bury them in the thing, because the people will cotton onto that one really quick. Oh yes, John Smith is always the murderer. It's like the butler.
You can always find a Johnson in my books because that's the name I give to characters I haven't thought about very much yet. If the character if the main character is the name you want, then you can always change other names that are similar. Yeah. But you keep the name. Franny Fisher walked into my head on a trip down Brunswick Street once in 1988, and I couldn't possibly have changed her name.
It's probably a good sign because it shows you're really connected with your character. It's really three-dimensional in your mind, so I'd say keep it.
Yep.
It's going to be
You've all spoken a bit about how ideally at the end of the story the reader should think, rats, I had everything there that I needed and yet I didn't make the leap. How do you go about handling your misdirection so that instead of thinking, rats, I should have thought of it, your reader doesn't instead think, oh, that's not fair, you know what I mean, that line?
I follow Golden Age rules. The Golden Age rules says that you can't have a wandering axe-murderer in the last chapter or the butler, and the butler can't do it, though I cherish the idea of actually having a novel where the butler did it because I'd love to do that. But
it's going to say where the butler was wandering around with an axe.
Unfortunately,
in the days of amnesia.
You can't do that either. That's
because he was bit by the lesbian vampire.
Yeah. You know how dangerous those lesbian vampires are. They're the worst type of vampire. Anyway, the thing is that if, for instance, you just want Golden Age rules, and you can go and look them up. They were from the Crime Club, which was 1920. Dorothy Sayers was in it, so were all the good crime writers at the time. If you want to hide a syringe, you hide it in a diabetic's handbag. As Chesterton said, where do you hide a leaf? You hide it in a forest. Where do you hide a dead man? You hide him on a battlefield. There's all sorts of those sort of rules that you've got to follow if you want your misdirection to work. But you can also, it's not difficult to do, provided you know what you're hiding. If you don't know what which I usually don't, what the contents of the desk ought to be or what the significant bit of it is, then you can just pass it through and it works perfectly well.
I think it's almost
impossible. Do not try this at home.
It's almost impossible to answer, really, because what you've asked there is something that is what it takes to be a writer, to do exactly that, to take all the rules, but then to just sort of twist them to your own way and make it sort of fresh and new. It's sort of the writer's voice almost you're talking about. So it's learning the rules, and then it's almost breaking them.
Yep,
I agree, and I think it depends on whether you're writing whodunits, or which I think probably Kerry writes, or whydunits, which is more like what I write. Yeah. And then you've got to kind of have a reason for what happened rather than an evidence chain, if you like.
And
so
hopefully
quite
too,
different.
if your characters are strong enough, your characters actually tell you. The characters actually lead you through the whole entire book in the end. Once they get on a roll, it becomes their story in a strange way, not even yours.
Yes, which sounds mildly demented, but is quite true.
Yes.
And on that note, I think we need to wrap up. Is that... Yes, we need to wrap up. And on behalf of my fellow crime writers, demented as we are, I'd like to thank you all for coming and joining us tonight.